as well as supporting the exec officer team with any campaigns that they have that relate to liberation, and of course developing training and workshops such as this one. So we'll get right into it, and I thought it'd be nice to start off with some introductions. So if everyone could introduce themselves, there's not that many of you, so we should be fine for all of you to talk. I'm happy for you to either unmute yourselves and talk, or if you'd rather put an introduction in the chat as well, that's absolutely fine. And if you could state your name and your pronouns, what position you hold, and what change you would most like to see in your education. So I'll go first. My name is Mullock. I use they, them pronouns, and I am the Democracy and Liberation Coordinator.
I suppose I'll go next then.
Yeah.
My name's Reed James. Pronouns are he/they. Positions I hold are course rep for history and politics, and union development representative. And what change would I most see? Well, I've got a lot actually, but the two biggest ones I'd say are probably for history and politics. The lectures to come out on time, so the schedule is incredibly uneven, and that's a massive problem when you're trying to plan your studies. And then for the union development representative, I think my biggest thing would just be more people participating in the elections. So, yeah.
Thanks for that, Reed. That was a really nice, comprehensive introduction.
I don't mind going next.
Yep.
Okay, so hi everyone, I'm Izzy. My pronouns are she, her, and I am course rep for Spanish and Italian, and department rep for modern languages. And I think the change that I'd like to see is that there's sort of a bit more of an awareness amongst tutors, sort of the accessibility of the, and the fact that, you know, it's not necessarily always accessible for everyone.
Have you stopped talking, or can I not hear you?
Yeah, no, sorry, I think that was it. Did you guys get all?
Yeah, did everyone else hear?
Cool, thank you.
Hi, I'm Frances. I'm actually a member of staff at the university, and I'm hoping I was allowed in really to the conference because I head up the sort of educational element of the university, the Leicester Learning Institute, and I'm trying to encourage a lot of student and staff partnerships that should bring about change. So I was very interested to find out your conception of change and how you think change happens, which is why I wanted to participate in this workshop. I'm happy to leave if you'd rather do a student-only space. And my pronouns
No, Frances, I think you're okay to say. Obviously, the content is very much centered around students making change, but I'm happy for you to stay if you'd like to.
Okay. Well, the change I'd most like to see is that students get much more involved in the curriculum changes. So, and there is space for activism at that level.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Frances. Okay. I think perhaps most of you introduced to each other. So just wanted to set some quick ground rules before we go on. This workshop and workshops like this often involve discussions of personal experiences. That's not a kind of obligation to share any personal experiences, by the way, but sometimes kind of some of the discussions can get quite potentially personal. And so we just ask you to respect the experiences of others. If you feel like you need to challenge, you want to challenge something, remember to challenge the statement and not the individual. Maintain confidentiality, including for those who aren't here. So basically what gets said, this training stays here. Speak from your own experience. So we really strongly suggest that if you do want to share something, that it's from your own experience and not the experience of someone else who isn't here. And please provide a trigger warning where appropriate. So if you're going to talk about something that might be particularly heavy, just let people know so that they can have the choice as to whether they want to engage with that. And feel free to step outside. So obviously that's for if it was happening in person, but if you need to kind of mute the computer and take some time out, or just kind of take a break from your laptop, that's absolutely fine, and you don't kind of need to let me or anyone else know. Answer, that's a really good question. I'm going to assume, I actually didn't realize it was recording. I'm going to assume that it would be shared at the very minimum with kind of all the people that were invited to this event. So actually that's a really good thing to consider, is that this session is obviously being recorded. And so if you are going to share something personal, do keep that in mind. I don't know whether we might upload it online, because often we upload videos and stuff onto our YouTube. Okay, there we go, Elaine is confirmed. So at the minimum, the students we've invited to this event. So yeah, please do keep that in mind if you're going to share something. Okay, so what is liberation? So we're going to talk a little bit about terminology, and I'm going to provide you with a little of a kind of introduction to liberation and privilege and intersectionality. We'll talk a little bit about diversity and decolonization, and then we'll go into practical tools on how you actually kind of campaign on campus, and some of the kind of interpersonal skills you'll need to do that, but also some of the practical skills. So we'll begin with liberation. So the NUS, the National Union of Students, defines liberation as the seeking of equal status and freedom from all forms of oppression. And through liberation or liberatory work, we aim to remove the social, political, and organizational barriers that disproportionately affect oppressed or marginalized groups. So I want us to have a think about this statement, another world is possible. And really the aim of kind of thinking about the statement and this exercise is to really kind of get your juices flowing and to kind of tap into your imagination and get thinking about some of the things that you really believe in and some of the things that you believe will create a better world. How can you kind of channel that into your work as a students' union rep? And so what does another world or a world without oppression look like to you? And what role does higher education and the role you're taking in higher education as a representative play in the world that you're imagining? So, Ian, could you set up a one, please? I'm not sure if Ian's here, so.
I am here, Mark. I can set
Oh,
up
you
a
are here.
whiteboard. You say you want the whiteboard set up?
Yes, please.
There you go.
Thank you. Okay. So I think all of you might be able to type, if you click text, and you might be able to type your answers out, or you can save them and I can type them out for you, whatever works. I'd recommend typing and not using the pencil function because that's going to be quite hard to use. Yep, Reid.
Am I allowed to speak, man? Or what?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. What was the actual question again? I forgot the first one. I had my answer. What was the actual first question?
Um,
Okay,
What
was
does
the
a
world
world without
like
oppression look like
yeah.
to you?
What does it look like? I mean, on a basic level, I think a world without oppression would mean more diversity of representation across all fields. We all know that in politics, for example, women are less likely to become politicians, or in education, black people compared to white people, even with the same background, are less likely to get lower grades. And those are all off-putting things to those types of people. So I think in a world without any kind of barriers, we'd see more women in politics, we'd see more black people going into education and getting good grades and then going on to better jobs, for example. And as for the role that higher education plays in that, it's not the only tool we should use, but it's one of the tools we definitely should be using. How get people up the ladder. We all know that people of color, for example, do have lower socioeconomic backgrounds, and education is a way to get people up the ladder and get them into better places. But it's not the only tool we should use.
Yeah. Anyone else? What does a world without oppression look like to you? You can put answers in the chat again. You can unmute your mic and talk, or you can type on the whiteboard if you like. Whatever works for you. We've got more women in positions of leadership. Yep. Welfare of humanity is more important than financial interests. Okay. These are some really good ideas. Has anyone else got anything that they'd like to share? Anything that comes to mind when you think of another world is possible, or what a world without oppression looks like? I'll give another minute just in case anyone is typing anything. More level playing field. Yep. Okay. Equal distribution of wealth. Okay, some of these are all really fantastic ideas. So having a think about your role as a student in higher education and as a representative of students in higher education, can you think of how any of the kind of ideas that we've got on this board maybe relate to your current position, or how you can kind of bring these beliefs and these ideals that you have into the work that you currently do? Do any of these link to higher education in any way? Yep, Reid?
Well, one thing you could do, which they link, is everyone's more diversity, and you can do that by trying to specifically encourage more women or more people of color to stand in roles, and that's one of the ways we're going to get rid of more of the people who are being oppressed in some way in positions of power, and showing that they can do it and that it's okay to be there.
Yep. So that's actually really, so for more diverse representation of all fields and also more women in positions of leadership, actually there's a lot that students' unions and student union representatives can do, and that link I think is quite obvious. And yeah, Reid, as you've definitely kind of encouraging people from marginalized backgrounds to run for positions of leadership within their institutions so that they can have a positive influence. There's 2 points here about both kind of relating to wealth. So welfare of humanity is more important than financial interests, and equal distribution of wealth. Can any of you think of a way maybe that those ideals can be brought into your work as reps within higher education? So Izzy said, "Be more scholarships or bursaries to support those in need." Yep. That's a really good.
Wouldn't that relate to giving equal opportunities to all the students? So like equal distribution of wealth to be going off what Izzy said, so more scholarships and more bursaries, that would be equal opportunities for all students to attend higher education, thus leveling the playing field for all people.
Yeah, absolutely. So we know that there are, and we'll talk about this in a little in the next few slides. There are systematic barriers to higher education, and kind of wealth and the cost of higher education is one of those. So Samia, you're absolutely correct. By providing like bursaries and scholarships that can help level the playing field for students from working class background and refugees and asylum seekers as well. So actually a good thing that this has actually proven, you know, Izzy's comment and then Samia, what you've said in relation to that is that a lot of these points all link together. So none of these points exist in isolation. They all ultimately, when you begin to work on them, they all link together to help make your education more accessible and more liberatory. And that's actually a really important point to remember, that none of these kind of campaigns and none of these ideals exist in isolation of each other. Everything links together. Ian, I'm done with the whiteboard now, so. Okay, I've just seen some messages in the chat, so. On the theme of linking together, Jenny's point about work-life balance resonates. Oh, point was that? Oh, here we go. The change in my education I would like to see is more of an easier work-life balance. Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that's part of making education accessible. And I think that's for students and staff. I think that student-staff solidarity is a really, really powerful tool that students can use. And part of making education more liberatory and accessible is also making sure that our academic staff are treated well, as well as our kind of cleaners and catering staff. Fifi, thank you for kind of coming in and introducing yourself. That's absolutely fine. No, you don't need to kind of speak through the mic. Typing kind of responses into the chat is absolutely fine. Okay, so moving on. So the term intersectionality is a term that has really kind of become popularized in common media and maybe in the last few years. How many of you have heard the term intersectionality before? Again, you can kind of unmute yourselves and just say, you know, or you can put it in the chat, whatever works. Yep. Feel free to say no, by the way. Yeah, but I was going to say, please feel comfortable to say, no, this isn't a test of any sort. It's just to know where people's kind of understanding is. Kinda, okay. In particular, for the people who said yes, do you feel comfortable defining that term? Obviously, I know that the definition is kind of on the screen currently, but pretending you haven't read the screen. I've not heard the term, but I've heard about it. Okay. So intersectionality, as I said, is a term that's become very, very popular over the recent years. But it's the actual definition of the term isn't very widely understood. Intersectionality can be a really important tool in informing how you organize on campus, or indeed anywhere. And so intersectionality is a theoretical framework that kind of explains how aspects of one's social and political identities might combine to create unique modes of discrimination. And it was coined by a lawyer, Kimberly Crenshaw, to describe the unique intersection of racism and misogyny experienced by Black women. And I think Kimberly Crenshaw was commenting on kind of lawsuits that were made by Black women in the workplace in America, where they were kind of experiencing discrimination on the premise of being Black women. But what the courts did is that they looked at the experiences of Black men in that workplace and white women in that workplace, and decided that Black men weren't being oppressed, so it wasn't racism, and white women weren't being oppressed, so it wasn't misogyny. Therefore, these Black women weren't experiencing any oppression. And actually what Kimberly Crenshaw kind of theorized was they were experiencing a unique intersection of the two that only applied to them. So in addition to multiple individual oppressions, new and multifaceted oppressions are experienced at axes of oppression. So if we take the example of Black women or women of color generally, they can experience misogyny on any given day and also racism on any day. What intersectionality describes is where the two overlap to, like I said, create kind of a new mode of oppression. So when we talk about kind of anti-Black racism intersecting with misogyny, so the racism that Black women often experience, that's generally kind of referred to as misogynoir. And another example that I've used on the slide here is that Muslim women will experience Islamophobia. They'll also experience sexism, but sometimes they will experience an intersection of the two, and that is referred to as gendered Islamophobia. So it's a unique form of Islamophobia that is only experienced by Muslim women or those who are kind of perceived as women. And obviously kind of Muslim men don't experience that. Does that make sense? I should have said this at the beginning, by the way. If anyone has any questions, like, don't feel like you need to wait until the end. You can throw them out whenever. I really don't mind. Guys, does this make sense to you? I don't want to move on unless it makes sense. I'm actually surprised I've never heard of it. That's understandable. I think intersectionality is very much a term that got popularized on through social media and through kind of activism that happened primarily on social media. But the term intersectionality has been around for decades. Kimberly Crenshaw, I think, wrote her essay on it in the 1980s. But the term really only gained kind of popular usage really within the last 5 years or so. So it's completely, and also if you're not on a course that that isn't like sociology related or kind of politics related, you're unlikely to kind of encounter it in your academic studies. So it's completely understandable. Here we go. Okay, so talking a little bit about diversity and decolonization. I'm not going to go into the kind of ins and outs of decolonization in higher education because Adnan, your education officer, is currently doing a workshop on that. So we're going to kind of skim over decolonization. If you'd like more details, definitely go check out his workshop in the second session. But I did want to touch on kind of what diversity and decolonization means and kind of the potential difference and contention between the two. So I guess again, just kind of more discussion. If you feel confident in naming these two terms, or you feel like you have kind of a definition, what does diversity and or decolonization mean to you? So when you kind of think of a term, what comes to mind? Do you think that there's a difference between the two? And if so, what do you think that difference is? And if you've heard these terms being used before, what context have you heard them being used? Again, if you want to unmute yourselves and talk, that's absolutely fine. If you want to put something in the chat, go ahead. And if you have no idea, by the way, what diversity or decolonization means, that's absolutely fine as well. Again, like I said, this isn't a test, it's just, this is a discussion. Yep, Reed?
Well, the way I'd say difference between them. This might not be a dictionary definition, but diversity is about people individually. Decolonization is about the same kind of thing in a wider context. So it might be about changing the educational curriculum to be less Eurocentric, for example, while in comparison, diversity would be targeting bursaries towards working class kids who are black to allow them to rise at the ladder, for example. So that's what the difference. In what context I've heard them being used. I think diversity gets thrown around a lot in a lot of different contexts to pin down, but I've heard it in a lot of places. Decolonization, have you heard it in an educational setting or a political setting, of decolonizing the curriculum, decolonizing politics, that kind of stuff? But obviously, it's also an event that happened in Africa and the Middle East when several African countries and Middle Eastern countries were decolonized, in essence, when the British and French left. So.
Thanks for that, Reid. That was, again, a nice and comprehensive answer. Does anyone else have kind of any thoughts? Again, this is kind of your own personal perception of a term. I'm not looking for like a right or a wrong answer. So don't be able to say something.
I think diversity is an acceptance of difference, and decolonization is challenging people's sort of construct of the world we're in, and the kind of history of how we've got here. So decolonization is a much more sort of activist term than diversity.
Yeah. So both Reid and Francis have kind of touched on like points and of contention between the two terms and the kind of difference between the two. Actually, you guys seem to have like a pretty solid definition of diversity and decolonization. So here's our definition of diversity. So especially in kind of how it relates and differs to decolonization. So diversity is recognizing individual differences between people. And in terms of kind of diversity initiatives often focus on bringing more and different perspectives kind of to the table. When we're talking about higher education, and generally when we're talking about institutions based in the UK, the kind of concept of coming to the fore is often still problematic because it's still focused around kind of whiteness, and whiteness here, by the way, is a social construct, essentially allowing people to join in. So when we're thinking about higher education, and kind of a lot of the institutions study in, they're often colonial legacies, and kind of inviting kind of a more diverse range of people into these institutions won't necessarily fix the kind of colonial legacies of these institutions. So that's diversity. Now, decolonization is kind of actively reflecting on assumptions about the world that have resulted from colonialism. And these assumptions are deeply ingrained within our kind of systems of power and dominant culture. So this is something that both Reid and Francis touched on in terms of diversity focuses more on the individual and decolonization is more systemic. And this is how. So decolonization essentially works to disrupt hierarchies in order to decenter and deprioritize whiteness or Eurocentricity, as Reid describes. And it's essentially rejecting the idea of a table altogether. So we shouldn't be needing to, if we were thinking about higher education, rather than kind of trying to invite more diverse range of people into higher education, we are looking to generally make higher education more open and accessible so that those barriers don't exist in the first place, rather than creating individual solutions to barriers experienced by different marginalized groups. And again, decolonization is kind of practical. So there's practical ways in which you can work to make your institution hold itself accountable for any kind of links that it has to colonialism and slavery, and B, looking at how those legacies manifest themselves in the way that the university operates today, which I've intentionally cut out of this workshop. But like I said, if you want to know more about that, definitely check out Adnan's workshop. Okay, so that's the first half of our of this workshop done. And like I said, this focused a lot on kind of terminology and a basic understanding of some of the terms that we use when we're talking about kind of liberation and campaigning on campus. The second half is looking at kind of interpersonal skills and practical skills that you need in order to be a grassroots activist. And so the first thing that I really want to talk to you guys about is self-care. So there's this beautiful quote by Audre Lorde, who was a kind of Black lesbian feminist writer. And it says, "Caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare." And I just want to have a bit of a conversation around kind of this quote and like your understanding of self-care, really. Have you heard of this quote before? Does this quote kind of resonate with you? And how do you think that this kind of relates to organizing and doing activism on campus?
I haven't heard of this quote, but it does resonate with me, as in, if you can't look after yourself and do self-care for yourself, how can you actively help other people in terms
Yeah.
of activism? Yeah,
Yeah. So you can't pour from an empty cup, right?
that's basically it.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Samia. Reid, go on.
I've never heard of the quote before, but it resonates with me a lot because a lot of I do a lot of stuff, so I've experienced quite a lot of burnout from time to time over the years. So it really does resonate with me because once you do get some kind of burnout, you know that's it. You know, you're no one near as effective. You can't write that essay that you need to. You can't organize that protest that you want to in the same way because you just can't focus on it. So it definitely resonates on a personal level as to how it relates to activism and campaigning on campus. Well, I think it's about keeping a mind that although you really do want to do your student role well and you should always be giving your best and campaigning or doing whatever your role requires, you should always keep in mind the biggest thing that you need to take some time out and some time out also to focus on your degree, because you must always remember that you are doing a degree on campus above all, really. So
Yeah,
that's
absolutely. So yeah, you really touched on a really good point, but I'm going to kind of just reiterate because I'm pretty sure none of you you're all kind of doing voluntary positions, and it's just really important to know that you are full-time students and that you're not doing this full-time. And burnout is a very, very, very common experience for student activists. So yeah, it's really important that you look after yourselves. Does anyone else have any kind of thoughts or feelings in relation to this kind of quote, or kind of thoughts on self-care generally? Okay. So thinking about kind of self-care, a lot of times when the term is used, it's often for kind of quite indulgent act. So the term self-care has kind of ironically been very, very commodified by kind of brands that are often trying to sell you things. So if any of you kind of follow any kind of skincare or makeup brands on social media, they will always be talking about self-care in relation to using their products. And I felt like it was really important, given how kind of self-care is kind of used now, to kind of differentiate between self-preservation moderation, which was kind of the original meaning behind self-care, and self-indulgence. And so, can you guys think of any examples of self-care, either one you can think of or kind of ways in which you've heard it being used? Examples of self-care that fit into the definition of kind of self-preservation and not self-indulgence.
Hello.
Hello.
Straight off the top of my head, self-care, something that I do and that Eleanor would know about, is that for an hour a day I'll go and do some painting or read a book and just sort of preserve my own artistic abilities and my creativity.
Yeah, that's really lovely, actually. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, Reid?
Well, self-care is all about ensuring that you can do the tasks that you need to do, and ensuring you've got time to eat. I know I've experienced times where I could probably actually find the time to eat, but I don't want to because I want to focus on the work, and therefore I miss meals. That it's not very healthy at all.
Yeah.
Or, so every day, usually I always try and ensure I've got time to eat, and always got about 1 hour around the day to. Like the previous person said, go find some time, go grab a book. It's not academic, that I have to critically read, and I can just read it, and that keeps me focused. So you're not constantly focusing on the work and what you've got next to do. So when you come back to it, you can be fresh, you can be ready to go at it rather than tired out.
Yeah. Reid, you made a really good point about kind of eating. And I think that ensuring that your basic needs as a human being are met is often really overlooked when it comes to self-care, but actually, especially if you are marginalized, that's often the kind of first thing to go. So ensuring that you're eating well and you're eating properly, ensuring that you're sleeping enough, also doing things like making sure you're taking your meds. If you're on any medication, making sure that you're taking them and you're taking them on time. Kind of, if you're able to kind of access things like therapy, ensuring that you're kind of going and engaging with those things and you're not neglecting those things in order to kind of do other things. Does anyone else have any examples, whether that's personal examples?
For me, I'm an introvert, so after speaking to like a lot of people all day, I like to have like an hour where I don't speak to anyone, I don't answer any texts or look at my phone. I just spend that hour by myself.
Yeah.
Staying away from people.
Yeah, that's really important. Actually, kind of, especially if you're kind of introverted. I know personally, I'm neurodivergent. I'm on the autistic spectrum, and so kind of socializing can be particularly difficult for me. And actually, it's really important for a lot of neurodivergent people to be able to kind of sit in their own company and not having to socialize with people. And again, that's not seen as something that's particularly like flashy or glorious, but it's really, really important for kind of the mental well-being of a lot of people. Yeah. Before we move on, has anyone else got kind of any like really good examples of it that I'd like to share with the group? Jenny?
I think as students, we always like neglect to take care of ourselves. Like, I know as international students, we're always worried about like 20 other things, like finances and like being in a new country and everything. So I feel like talking from an international student perspective, I think we always sort of neglect to take care of ourselves and we'll always forget about it. It's not until like a friend of ours who is like, I've had multiple times where I've had friends of mine be like, Jenny, calm down, like, like relax. So I think that's a big thing.
Absolutely. And that actually leads me really nicely onto, you kind of touched on it a little bit there, Jenny, something that we call community care. So just to kind of wrap up self-care, self-care often isn't particularly easy or fun. And the examples you guys shared were really kind of good examples of that. They're not necessarily like I said, fun or kind of luxury things to do, indulgent things to do, but they're really, really crucial for ensuring that A, you're looking after your mental and your physical well-being, and B, that any of the work that you are doing, whether that's your academic work or your kind of your student rep positions, that you're ensuring that they are sustainable because you're after yourself, because you're preventing burnout. Self-care isn't always possible. Kind of the example that Jenny gave is a really good example of that. Sometimes you need a friend to tell you, hey, you haven't been eating recently, like you should go and eat something. So why might some people not always or never be able to practice self-care? And what would need to happen in this case? Yeah, Reid?
From my own experience, it's usually because you think you have too much work on, or you do have too much work on, and you've taken on too much, or you've timetabled it all day. It's usually been one of the three for me. And what would usually need to happen is, for me, usually it was impossible to see I was taking on too much work until I'd had a burnout. And then I'd be able to see that, oh, maybe I am taking on too much work. Maybe I'm doing work not in the way that I should do. I'm not taking effective notes and for me, it usually took an intervention by someone else to help get me out of it. So you have to come to that yourself, or someone else usually has to tell you. But something needs to change. And in my experience, it's always been giving up the work or working in a different way.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Reid. Hannah, I can see your hands up.
I was sort of thinking about what Reid said previously about eating. So I know 2 years ago, so I moved out of my family's home and I lived on my own. It was just sort of prioritizing, like even just cooking videos. I didn't put the effort in because it's just for me. I don't have to show off to anybody. I don't have to. Pot noodles, okay. It's nothing. I don't have to put the effort in. So that was sort of quite hard to have that motivation to actually let me take some time out and prepare a nice meal.
Yeah, that's really nice, and again, a really good example of self-care that very much falls into the definition of kind of self-preservation and sustainability, and not self-indulgence. Has anyone else got any kind of examples of when someone might not be able to practice self-care and what a good course of action would be in that case? Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about community care now. So there's this kind of really powerful quote that I found by an activist called Nikita Valerio. And she said, shouting self-care at people who actually need community care is how we fail people. But kind of touching on what we kind of covered a little bit in the last slide is that sometimes there are times when people are unable to engage in self-care, and people who are particularly marginalized are almost never able to take part in self-care. A really good example that I can think of are people who are homeless. They do not have the physical capacity to engage in self-care. They don't have the resources to do that. And this is where community care is really, really important. And so there might be times, a lot of you, very, very rarely will you ever be working by yourself when you're a student rep. You're often working closely with other students who have been elected into similar roles as you. And especially if the work that you're doing is particularly taxing or particularly heavy or triggering, community care can be really, really important. And so, yeah, sometimes we need to take collective responsibility for the well-being of others. And that's essentially what community care is. So what does this mean for kind of activist groups or kind of anyone really who kind of is, like I said, work with other students? Whenever you're working with your peers, it's something to keep in mind. So we've got some few kind of examples on the next slide. Let me see if, oh yes, it does work. So let me take it out first. Okay. So these are kind of 3 different forms of community care that I've kind of personally seen throughout kind of my time in the student movement, and they all kind of seek to look after other members of a community in a different way. And so I'll talk you through each of the examples, and I will start with this you feel like shit flowchart. So a little bit of background with this, with the flowchart that you see. The University of Goldsmiths in South London last year, was it last year? Nope, 2 years ago now, had a student-led occupation over kind of racism during elections. So there were kind of a lot of things that students of colour in particular were unhappy about. But I think it was a hate crime during elections week against a candidate that kind of tipped people over the edge. And so they basically occupied the university building for like a good 4 months. It was an incredibly stressful situation for them, as you can imagine, especially for such a long time. And one of the ways in which they ensured that their kind of action was sustainable was by ensuring that people were looking out for each other, and that kind of community care was a very kind of core part of how they organized the occupation. And so as I understand, one of the more kind of privileged people that were taking part in the occupation made this flow chart, and it was basically stuck up on the wall of the main room that they were occupying. I don't think I can zoom in anymore. Let me click in again. There we go. But it basically talks about, okay, if you feel bad, have you eaten? If you haven't, then go and eat. Have you kind of slept properly? Do you feel dirty? Obviously, the place that they occupied, I don't think had like running showers, and obviously didn't have things like actual beds and stuff. So it's kind of couldn't stay there for too long because it's just very comfortable to be in. But it basically talked you through kind of all the things that maybe led up to you feeling quite unwell emotionally. And I know that in relation to this, that if you needed to speak to someone, they basically had a rota for wellbeing reps. And that's basically where people who were taking part in the occupation volunteered for a few days of the week to basically be the kind of contact for anyone who was feeling kind of stressed, anxious, down, depressed, whatever. And kind of that was the collective responsibility. So everyone kind of had to volunteer to kind of take on that welfare role at some point in the occupation. And that's a really, really good example of community care where everyone kind of chipped in to ensure the collective well-being of this group of activists. Then we have the Command Amalia Soul Session. So Amalia is basically like a group and for Muslim women. And I'm trying to remember what this was after. I think this might have been, this was this year actually, and I think this was in a response to the Black Lives Matter protests. So this year has been particularly kind of traumatizing for the Black community. And obviously I won't go into details just in case it's triggering for some people. There's been a kind of a real rise in police brutality, and kind of lots of kind of triggering videos and stuff circulating where kind of police have essentially kind of murdered a Black civilian. And there's been kind of lots of protests as a result of that. And so this group basically organized a literal safe space for Black Muslim women to come and grieve. And I think they brought kind of food and stuff along as well. And it was just really literally a space for Black Muslim women to kind of sit and eat company in a space that was kind of safe for them and created specifically so that they could connect with each other and grieve. And that's, again, another example of community care. So literally carving out a space for vulnerable people. I'm glad you think so, Samia. Amalia, by the way, are on social media if you want to kind of give them a follow and kind of keep in contact with their work. I think they did this for Muslim women as well after the Christchurch attack that happened in 2019. So again, they kind of had another group kind of set up a space for Muslim women to kind of grieve and connect with each other. And then finally, I'm aware that we're running out of time. UK Mutual Aid, so this is providing financial aid to people within a community. And so this isn't charity, this isn't kind of organizations raising money and then kind of putting it into local authorities or something. This is literally direct kind of wealth redistribution. So kind of if you are feeling particularly kind of flush or you are kind of financially stable, you can directly support people who are in crisis. There's kind of primarily like lots of kind of working class people or people who are kind of living below the breadline, struggling to kind of pay bills, pay rent, and you can kind of donate to them. It's kind of on a trust basis, and anyone is essentially allowed to ask for money, and anyone is able to donate as well. Obviously, lots of rules and stuff that kind of is in this group, but yeah, that's basically what Mutual Aid is. So we've kind of got some financial support, kind of carving out literal spaces for people to connect with each other, and then also a kind of a practical example of how community care and kind of the collective well-being kind of comes into place in higher education, in particular in activist groups. I'm really glad that you think so, and I'm really glad that this is kind of resonating with you. But this is really, I think this stuff gets kind of overshadowed a lot when we're organizing. But this type of what community care is what keeps campaigns sustainable and what keeps kind of organizing within the student movement sustainable. So it's very overlooked often, but it's a really, really crucial part of organizing as a student. And then finally, oh, here we go. There we go. Okay, so finally, very quickly, looking at how activists can make change. So there's 4 main ways in which you as a student are able to kind of enact change on your campus. And so this is outside the usual kind of bureaucracy of kind of going to meetings and like emailing members of staff. What I really want you guys, there's one thing I want you to take away from this is that you don't need kind of permission. You don't need our permission as an SU or permission from members of staff in order to enact change on your campus. You have the power and the agency to collectively organize and see your demands met. And these are kind of just the 4 main ways in which you can do things like that. So using social media, kind of using kind of solidarity, protests, and direct actions. Are there any of these terms that you don't understand? Go over. Okay. What's the difference between protests and direct actions? Okay, so actually there's not an enormous difference between the two, but protests are often you're generally taking part in a lot of protests. So if you think about when we have free education protests, for example, in London, sabbatical officers from unions will often go and join that protest. Protests are often also kind of, you'd have kind of police having cordoned off an area and stuff ready for protesters to come. So it's often a lot more of just kind of putting up placards and chanting and things. Direct actions are a lot more kind of active and a lot more kind of confrontational often in their nature. Okay, we don't have time to discuss this, unfortunately, but some things that you should consider when kind of organizing a response to something or organizing a campaign is, out of the kind of all the methods you have at your disposal, which one would you go for first, and which ones do you think are more serious, and what should you consider when you're escalating something? So things like, what's your best and worst case scenario? Is what we're kind of planning to do kind of accessible? How are we going to get the word out and make sure students come up? Stuff like that. So sorry I had to rush for the last bit, but if you want, this is all recorded anyway, so if you'd like to kind of go back and kind of do some brainstorming for yourselves, you absolutely can. Yeah, thank you for coming to this workshop. I hope you found it helpful. I hope you found it inspiring, and I hope that you found that you've learned something that you can hopefully take into your work as a student. How do we get this recording? Samia, I believe we'll be sending it to you via email. So I'm going to just pop a link into the chat for you to be able to go into the next sessions.
Just done that, Alex. So it should be there.
And is it already in the main chat?
Yeah. Oh, no.
Oh, okay.
Hold on. No, hold on. I've just copied it in. No. I'll do that now.
Oh, don't worry. I've already copied and pasted it. So
Cool. Brilliant.
Just waiting for it to send.
Okay. So yeah, so sessions 2 will start at 11:45. Thank you, Malek. That was fantastic. Click on the relevant links, and that will take you directly into those meetings, those workshops.
Thank you all.
That's okay. Thank you for coming.
Right, Malek. So we need to swap sessions as well.
Oh God.
So we need to leave this session and go into the next one. So I'll see you there in about a minute.
Sure. Okay. See you.